Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. In today's episode, I am going to be taking my pumpkin pie recipe and making a traditional pumpkin pie, pumpkin pasties, and stuffed pumpkin oranges. A lot of people have asked me about whether or not I was going to make this video because they have tried my pies. I cannot call it my pie because I found this recipe on the internet. I was just browsing for a quick pie recipe that had the least amount of ingredients, and this one happened to have the least amount of ingredients, which is the only reason why I chose it. But what makes the major difference is the pumpkin that I'm using. The fact that I'm not using a canned pumpkin and that I am using a homegrown organic pumpkin that I grew here, I think that makes a world of a difference. This is the Long Island cheese pumpkin. These were a really big hit last year. I'm going to be using this smaller one today to do this tutorial because I don't need a slew of pies. Something this size gives me about 8 pies. This size should give me just what I need. 1 pie and a couple other variations of the recipe. I know a lot of people think that you should be using a sugar pie pumpkin, and though that is a good pumpkin that can both do sweet and savory, the main stuff that you get in the cans are actually these kind of pumpkins. One of the easiest ways to prep your pumpkin is just to use a potato peeler. If I'm dealing with a really big pumpkin, I'll usually cut it in half, but let's see how this goes. Sometimes it's easier just to handle when they're this size without chopping it first. I think using the potato peeler retains the majority of the pumpkin. You don't lose as much. Sometimes holding the stem really can help. Whoa, take that back. That was a little bit of a weak stem. If you can't get to the bottom, get as much as I possibly can. And then once I cut it, I'll get whatever's left. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this in half. I just have a spoon. If you want to make some roasted pumpkin seed, you can save them for that. Fresh pumpkin smell is just so amazing. Okay, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just dice my pumpkin. I'm gonna be boiling this pumpkin, so I want, about 2 inch by 2 inch chunks, roughly. Okay, I'm gonna rinse this in a colander and then get it into a bath of hot water with a little bit of salt. And we're gonna boil that until I can get a fork through and it's tender. Now that my pumpkin has passed the fork test, I have drained my pumpkin and put it in my 2-cup measuring cup. I always go a little bit extra because there's a lot of space in there, pumpkins being in chunks. And this is a very, very easy recipe. You're basically just gonna throw all your ingredients into the blender, blend it up, and pour it into your pie crust. I cannot just do a basic pie crust. I'm gonna do one traditional pie, some pumpkin pasties, and a little bit of a spin on an alternative way in case you are a no cruster or can't eat gluten and don't want to make a gluten-free pie crust. It is going to be this same recipe though of filling that goes into all of those. So here we go. We have 2 cups of the pre-boiled pumpkin, 2 eggs, 1 can of sweetened condensed milk. You can use 1 tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice. However, every pumpkin pie spice is made a little bit differently. It depends on the brand. One time I purchased one that was way too heavy on the ginger. So since then, my remedy has been this mixture. If this mixture ends up being a little too complicated for you, just stick with a 1 tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice, but buy a good brand. I have 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, whichever brand. And then to level that out, I have a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. The other thing you're going to need is a 1/2 teaspoon of some salt, and I'm just using some pink Himalayan. It doesn't really matter what salt you go with, it's just what I have. And then I'm going to be adding 1 teaspoon of vanilla. This is my homemade batch of vanilla. It is finally ready. Started this in April and it takes 6 months to cure. And to make this vanilla, all I did was put 5 or 6 vanilla bean pods in a jar, and I filled my jar with bourbon. I'm just gonna add a teaspoon of that in. It takes 6 months to cure. You have to go in and rotate it once a week or so, give it a little agitation. But after 6 months, this can be drained, transferred into its own container, and the beans reused. So if I was to pour this off, I could go ahead and add some more bourbon, or you could use vodka if you don't want to use bourbon. Start it over again, and then in another 6 months, you'd have a new batch. All goes into my blender, and then I'm just gonna blend it on up. Sometimes the spices get stuck to the blender, so you want to just get in there. And my first version, I'm going to fill up this pie crust, and I always end up with a little bit of extra. I don't normally bother making my own pie crust. There's so many versions of a pie crust as you can get out there. Some of them do have a weird, funny aftertaste, but I have to say the Marie Callender ones in the freezer section are really great pie crusts. I am trying out a gluten-free pie crust today, so we're gonna see how that goes. I'm gonna go throw this in the oven. I preheated my oven at 365 degrees, and I'm gonna bake this for 50 to 60 minutes until a toothpick goes in the center and it comes out clean. For my no crust option, I have 2 navel oranges. This one batch will probably do about 8 oranges. I'm just doing 2 with this leftover that I have. To start, I am going to cut both ends. And now I'm going to use a paring knife. I want to be sure to cut at a bit of an angle because I need to make sure there's some bottom left. That way the filling doesn't go pouring out of the bottom. You can kind of slice in the upright position and then tip your knife at an angle to get the remainder part, and just use a spoon to scoop it on out. Here I have this well. I have made sure that, I still have some firm place on the bottom, so I'm just going to fill my orange with the pumpkin pie filling. And this is going to go on a baking sheet, and I'm going to bake that in the oven. And I'm going to keep an eye on it because of the moisture of the orange. It can take just as long as the regular pie. Your oven temperatures are going to vary, and also your bake time is going to vary because of the type of orange, the size and whatnot, and how much you've actually scooped out. Just do the toothpick test. If you stick a toothpick in the middle and it comes out clean, then it's good to go. All right, into the oven these go, and we're gonna move on to some pumpkin pasties. I like to use puff pastry crust. You could use a pie crust, the rollout sheet kind of pie crust, but I think that the puff pastry crust makes really great little hen pie. And I also have cheapy little ravioli presses that I got. There were 3 different sizes for like $5. If you buy the really good kind, the outside ring becomes a cutter. Because this is the cheapy kind, it has this bar in the center, so I'm gonna have to use a paring knife to just kind of cut around the circle. That's what you get for paying $5. Have a little bit of some flour to help prevent it from sticking. If you want to give this a roll out with a rolling pin, you can. I'm just going to do a bit of stretching. So now I'm just going to take the tip of my paring knife and cut around that circle. Next to me, I have a cookie sheet. I'm just gonna grease that with some cooking spray. Great thing about using these presses is that it has a well for you to be able to put the filling in. I'm just going to do a little bit of stretching and making sure I get the dough over the edge. I have a small finger bowl here with some water in it. Pour a little bit of my filling. You don't want to overfill because these things can burst very easily. Run a finger along the edge and press. Now, if you don't have one of these presses, you could definitely do this by hand. You could use a glass to trace around. You will want to be careful when you're making that well, and then you could just use a fork to do the pressings. The only downfall to using this puff pastry crust is you're not going to get too many. I gotta be real careful. I have the tendency to overfill things. When you go to bake these, you're probably looking at 20 to 25 minutes. Follow the bake time that puff pastry requires. You could take the remainder of this dough and throw it in a frying pan with a little bit of oil, sugar and cinnamon them, and sort of a doughboy. Alright guys, I am done. Here are the results of my baking for the day. My traditional pumpkin pie, my pumpkin pasties, and my stuffed pumpkin oranges. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and I hope to see you soon. Some pumpkin pasties, some pumpkin pasties, some pumpkin pasties. All right, I'm getting hungry now.